Thank you very much. Sorry. Good afternoon and welcome to this session on Techvelopment and partnerships in the humanitarian development area. I'm not really sure if I speak very loud. Can you hear me? Good, good. Thank you. It's good to see a very committed audience for the session. I've been invited to moderate by the Danish Refugee Council. My name is Tine Anbæk, and I'm from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where I work with market-driven partnerships. Our panel today is these very handsome four gentlemen. I think I would like to start with Bech Tharsgaard, who initiated this. He's from the Danish Refugee Council, head of business engagement, where they work on new forms of collaboration between the Danish Refugee Council and the business sector. We have Johan, Juul Jensen, who is an expert in social innovation and impact investment. Some of you might already know him because he's an operator in the field. He's the co-founder and COO of SolarStack, and he's a board member in Mobilize Construction. We have Peder Nielsen from the Novo Nordisk Foundation, and Peder recently joined this exciting foundation as their CEO. But he is not completely new, I think we can say, to the foundation, because you've been working as an advisor to the foundation, but in another function. Then, last but not least, we have Johan Risvig. Johan is an impact investor, and he's out there doing it already. He is a partner in VP Kapital, which is a growth capital investment firm. They focus on small B2B, and they have a very interesting combination, I'm sure he will tell us more about it, of a very active ownership model with injection of growth capital. So let's get started. The session will start with a few warm-up questions that I will ask our four panelists, and then we'll leave the floor to you later on for questions from you. I would like to ask you first, Anders. An organization as the Danish Refugee Council, are you geared to investing or engaging in these new types of partnerships with businesses? And what can a tech company gain from partnering up with you as an organization?
Thanks a lot, Tine. Are we geared to work with the private sector and tech companies? I would say partially, yeah. And are we interested? Certainly. So I think sometimes we explain ourselves as an organization that has 8,000 employees, and we have, let's say, 10 or 15 people that has the word business in their title. So I think that indicates that the whole way of working with the business is the private sector is fairly new to us. So I think we have a lot of visions on working with the private sector. Also acknowledgement that we are not here to somehow solve the humanitarian challenges alone. And I think when we're looking at conflicts or areas that are coming out of conflict, our dream would be that we can actually also engage with the private sector, combine sort of the skills, the mindset, the knowledge, the resources to come up with more sustainable solutions. The reality is that we are an organization of roughly 400 million euros, so it's a really big organization, and by far the majority of our portfolio is implemented in very short term. So we somehow are very reactive, but we certainly are interested in working with the private sector. Working with tech companies, I think what we can offer is presence. It's knowledge about things on the ground, contextual knowledge and needs. So what we do see is a number of tech companies are contacting us now. They would like to have somehow their products tested, also for refugees, displaced populations. And for that, we're happy to do so. So partially yes, partially no, however you want to turn it. Yeah.
That's a very good start. Thank you, Anders. I'm moving on to Peder from the Novo Nordisk Foundation. You have a vision about working also in solving the very large global challenges, and you have engaged in a commitment to work against antibiotic resistance. Can you tell us a bit more about why you went into this field and how you do it?
Sure. So first of all, the foundation is active in a number of areas in the humanitarian development aid space, and have for the last 50 years or so done a lot of efforts to help combat diabetes through health education. Some of that we've done on ourselves, or through Steno Diabetes Center, and also working with the World Diabetes Foundation. More recently, what we launched earlier this year is a 1 billion Danish kroner investment fund focused on combating antibiotic resistance. Antibiotic resistance is a huge problem. You have about 700,000 people who die of that each year. 90% of those are in the developing countries. 60,000 babies die annually in India from antibiotic resistance. And when we sort of look forward 20, 30 years, the number of deaths annually could be close to 50 million people, simply because we've got antibiotics that the bacteria are resistant against. So what we've set up is an investment fund where we invest into companies that are active in this field. This is not a particularly lucrative field to invest in. Most of the global pharma companies have exited that area. There's very little venture capital funding in the area, which essentially means we're doing it as an impact investment. So that 1 billion is going through a rigorous screening process as we invest in those companies. And throughout that process and lifetime of the companies, we of course support them with expertise and more money as needed. But it's a way of tackling an issue that frankly otherwise would have gone, if not unnoticed, then would have gone unattended by the global pharma companies. And that's an important sort of new step for us as we look ahead.
Thank you. I would like to move on to Johan with your hands-on experience from the tech environment. Do you believe that it's increased knowledge and solutions from the tech environment that will help us solve the current challenges in the world? And how would you say that we can really take off and reach speed?
Yeah, so I think it's really a yes or no answer I have to give, because no, technology is not the solution. Technology almost never really solves anything worth solving. It's the people that does it. You need to contextualize it. There are so many projects that's very well developed, where you have very well designed SMS platforms that tries to reach out to people in emergency situations. You have actually, I heard somebody mention M-Pesa. M-Pesa is inferior software in every sense of the word. M-Pesa has worse code than Airtel does. But what M-Pesa really managed to crack is how to engage with their customers. They managed to scale their model and became completely the dominating force. So by that saying, tech has a role, and tech companies has a role in solving this, but tech alone, as in this terminology with Techvelopment, I think the focus on it is very positive, but I'm afraid that you end up overdoing it to an extent.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Jon, I don't know how I can move my... Thank you. Jon, you have already invested your own money in a company that is delivering solutions to the humanitarian market. Yes. What do you define as preconditions before you go into an investment? And would you imagine going into as an investor in a joint venture between a tech startup company and, for instance, a Danish Refugee Council?
Yeah, well, to answer the first question first, I guess as any investor, you would have a certain number of criteria that you want your investments to live up to. In our case, it's business-to-business company that has a minimum of 10 million Danish kroner in turnover. For other investors, they will have other criteria. But I guess for all investors, they will look for three things. They will look for a market, they will look for a product, and they will look for a team. And in the humanitarian sector, you can discuss whether there is a market, but there definitely is a need. And the question is, can you as a company couple the need with sufficient funding for your product? And that is where typically an NGO can be a strong help and a strong asset for a startup, is that if the NGO has access to the players in the market, then the NGO can typically be a strong advisor or partner for a startup company to identify whether the need is actually also a market. So to answer that question, if I would be ready to invest in a joint venture between a startup company and an NGO, I would say if the product is there and the team is there and the two players, so the NGO and the company, has identified that there's a market and not just a need, then yes.
Okay, good. That's very good news. I would like to move on with a very quick second round of questions before we go back to the audience. Anders, again, Danish Refugee Council. People say that there has been a shift in the way development cooperation work with the SDGs, and that there are new models for cooperation and collaboration coming up. Do you think that you, in the future, as an NGO working with refugees, would engage in partnerships with business partners? And how can you make that combination of helping people in need and then profit for a business partner? How do you handle that?
That very easy balance, yeah. I think that the shift has happened. I think it's fairly evident as we see it. The ones of you who are following the whole Sustainable Development Goals agenda, and some of the numbers out there, if we are to reach that very ambitious agenda, we need to, it's 10 times somehow the amount that currently goes into aid, that's even the financing that is required to meet those goals. So I think that's clear. We need status quo doesn't work, or it's not enough. And I think what's interesting over the last few years is that we see also our donors and the community in general is asking us, actually pushing us to engage much more with people like you, tech startups and the whole community, where I think it's fair to say the development work has otherwise been working in the same model for the last 40, 50 years. So I think that shift has happened. I think also, be honest with you, saying like we are exploring how we can go about this. Because how can you on one hand be there to protect people and we being very sort of separating yourself from business interests, and on the other hand trying to engage in more committing models. And we don't have the solution right now, but I can tell you we are certainly looking into how, especially also some of the American NGOs are organizing this. And one model that is out there is you see NGOs who are engaged in more social investment funds. But that comes then also discussions. Is that our role? Do we have the capacity to do so? But I think the main point is that status quo is not enough, so we simply need to. So that's a bit where we are now.
We are running short of time, unfortunately, because there was a delay in the previous session, so we are trying to not take too much of the time for the next session. But I would like to ask you, Johan, as an investor, is the humanitarian field interesting? Is it a good business case?
It very much depends on the product and the company, of course. I guess that's up to you as a company to decide. Do we have a product that's strong enough? Do we have a team that's strong enough? And then really figure out, is there a market? And that is not, is there a need? So as a company, you have to convince me as an investor that there's a market. And I think that is the tough challenge when you're speaking about the humanitarian sector, is that it's very easy to see that there's a need, but is there a willingness to pay? Without the willingness to pay, there's not a market. So that is the crucial question. when you're speaking about companies that are working in the humanitarian sector.
No.
But there's definitely a need, and there's definitely a need for solutions that can assist many of those issues that are around the world.
Thank you. Johan, I'm being a bit provocative now. We know that you have developed solutions, tech solutions that are actually on the market now. What is the comparative advantage of you doing this from Denmark rather than supporting local techs, developers in the context where they have all the knowledge? What is the advantage for you?
There's no advantage. You shouldn't support me over somebody in Nairobi. You shouldn't support somebody in Nairobi over me. You should support the idea. The person who's dedicated to actually taking the product and taking it to market with the cultural context, with the human-centered, design-driven approach. I have friends who've grown up, Ugandans, for example. I have a Ugandan friend who runs a startup who's basically never outside of Kololo, which is the Hellerup of Kampala. There's no advantage for him of being Ugandan either. So it's not whether you're based in Copenhagen or in Kampala. It's your dedication to actually getting that product out, understanding your user, understanding the market. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know. Niels Peder, one last question for you. The initiative that Novo Nordisk Foundation is funding on antibiotical resistance, I think it's called the Repair Impact Fund. Are there any experience from that fund and that initiative that you will take forward when you are starting? I know you will be looking into a stronger commitment in the social humanitarian development area.
So maybe just back up. The antibiotic fund is new. It's less than 6 months old, and we are still very much trying to get it up and running, and we'll see the impact of that. But I think we've got a number of other interesting areas that could be relevant in a humanitarian development aid context. First of all, we have an exciting initiative on STEM education, using digital learning as a key element of that, which could potentially be quite interesting in a broad global context. Secondly, we are doing a big public to private partnership called Steno with all the Danish regions, and now also looking into potentially going into the northern parts of Denmark, where we think that type of public to private partnership can be a real game changer for how you look at not just diabetes but also other chronic diseases in a clinic type way. And you know, I think we have a number of other potential areas that are very close to our heart, to our DNA, that I think we over time could see being a good partnership potential with DRC or other similar organizations.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Yes, please. Yeah, so that was a very pertinent question on the ethics when you invest in a market, especially in the humanitarian market. How do you ensure the ethics?
I think in particular in pharmaceuticals, that is a huge issue, right? I think it's a little bit different in some of the tech areas. Obviously, there are also ethical dilemmas there, but there's no doubt that in the pharma space, it's very real. It of course means that we as investors and as owners and as businesses need to adhere to the same stringent standards that we do in the rest of the world. Follow the same type of testing protocols. There are things we say no to simply because we just can't get comfortable with the testing regime around it. So I think it's you've got to find your own clear, non-negotiable standards around how you do that, for sure.
Thank you. Is that a question?
Otherwise, there's a long list here, Tine, also. There's our own list on this board also.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, fantastic. So, blockchain technology in the humanitarian aid sector.
Should I
No.
take that? There's a huge advantage in the blockchain technology, of course, also in the humanitarian sector, that it provides a lot of transparency, or can provide a lot of transparency, where things are often intransparent. If you have the right solution that can help a certain issue on the blockchain, then that can actually also assist with your question around ethics, because the transparency will help both the investors and the customers and the partners understand what is going on. So there can be many different applications of the blockchain technology in the humanitarian sector. I'm sure that you've been exposed to some already, Anders, but just bring that forward and continue developing those ideas.
Great. Let's just take the second on the list. It's about once we have clarified and solved the access to communication, internet technologies, what are the products or services that you would think would be most useful for them? I suppose it's users in developing settings.
I can give it a first
Yeah.
try. I think that's the whole beauty of it. No, once we have that infrastructure or the connectivity, then we can lay on a number of other sort of activities on top of that, and that's really the sort of the basics. And I think also when we are talking to people who are actually on the move or fleeing from their home, and we ask them, "What do you need?" What we hear now, people say, "I would like connectivity." Yeah. So we stand there with our food basket and ready to distribute, but people actually want connectivity and to somehow connect them. So we're discussing with other providers, could we then connect them to the labor market? And when you sit and talk to young Syrians sitting in Jordan, they're ready to engage in the global market economy, and we see it as our role of connecting them. And the same things when it comes to education and whatnot. I mean, once we have the connectivity there, then I think we have come a good way.
But I think that's the beautiful thing about going back to the question, what can the tech community really provide in humanitarian aid? We have a structure where the best solution wins, hopefully, or at least the best branded solution wins. If you deliver something on a tech platform or a smartphone connectivity that doesn't work for the local population, it dies. So it doesn't really matter. It doesn't make any sense to ask somebody like me to give a semi-qualified opinion on what the local people in northern Uganda needs. They know it themselves. So if you, as a tech startup, think you have a good idea, well, they're your judges. I'm not, or we are not.
Yes, please. We can't hear you. Can you approach?
There we go. Yeah, okay. So you guys are talking about connectivity, right? And once you have that infrastructure installed, XYZ, then the people will have the opportunity to have different services and products, right? But the fact here, the problem already starts from the companies that owns the infrastructure. For an example, in Burundi, they have the best infrastructure, meaning fiber, right? But the price for, let's say, the internet, right, the connectivity, it's so high that people actually are not capable or can actually afford to be connected, even though the structure is there, right? So the problem, does it start there or the services and products?
I think it's a very, very good observation that is very valid in many settings in the real world, and I think one of the part of solutions to that, solving those kinds of issues, because it's all about the frame conditions in the local setting. Public-private partnerships can be part of the solutions to that. I work with public-private partnerships on a daily basis, and the combination of having, for instance, civil society organizations, a public partner, it could be, in my case, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You can have a tech company, you can have investors, but because you need to engage in a valid way in that kind of dialogue with the public sector. about framework conditions and how do you allow others into the market, how do you create competition, because competition is oftentimes what can help bring down the prices. But I don't think we can have a solution on that large question here today, just an indication that public-private partnership might be part of the solution. And I think we are being told that time is running out. I'm very sorry because Nikolai had put his head out there with his name with the questions and we didn't get the time to answer it. Come and find us after the session if you still want us to have a chat on that. And
How about,
thank you.
could we point it, let's say, at a back corner, that if people were still interested in meeting you, that maybe they could meet you by the entrance to the stage area?
Yes,
Yeah?
of course. Good idea. Thank you very much. One of the points that came up was we need people to work together. I think this is a very good expression of how that can be brought about. Thank you.
Thank you.